Hello, I'm Raeanna Tilly. I am an artist, a mother of five, and a firm believer that art is for everyone. Whether you're brand new to watercolor or believe that you can't even draw a stick figure, even if you are a reluctant artist, I got you. In today's video, we're diving into one of the most important yet often overlooked techniques, water control. It's the technique that unlocks all the depth and drama from each pigment. And we're keeping it super simple by only using one color. I'm also using student grade paints and paper so that you can achieve the same look at home. No fancy stuff required. You don't need professional paints to do this. We'll start with a fun little exercise called tea to butter. And then we will use the skills we've learned to paint a peaceful mountainscape. So grab your brushes, your paint, your paper, your water, maybe even your favorite cup of tea, and let's get painting. So here's my setup for today. I have the Pretty Excellent by My Lang. It's a student grade watercolor set that I think is fantastic. It's what I used to teach myself watercolor before I started getting into the more professional lines. I have a basic Mimic round 6 brush. I usually prefer to use the Princeton brushes, but for this I wanted to use something that is more economical. So no matter what budget you have, you can access similar materials or the same materials that I'm using today. This is a Paul Rubens cold press block 5x7. When I got this kit, it actually was included with the paints in the kit. So that was really amazing because I discovered this paper and it is my favorite paper to practice on, especially in block form. A watercolor paper block is just a group of paper that is glued on all sides so that the paper doesn't curl when it gets wet. It's very convenient. I have my plate so that I can see the water control with the paint I'm using, and a paper towel so that if my brush gets too much water, I'll dab it on the paper towel. All right, let's get into it. So when you first are learning watercolor, I suggest the best way to learn what watercolor is and how it works is to play with it and just do it. Don't worry about technique, don't worry about what it's supposed to look like, just start using it. Take the first step, get your brush wet, and start working with the pigment. So I wet my brush and I started getting the pigment wet. Sometimes it needs to be activated first so you get the water on it, and you can see I got some pigment there, and that's a good amount. So I'm gonna start with that and add some water to it. So actually it makes sense to go. We're gonna go from dark to light today. So you're going to load up your brush with as much of the paint as possible. And you want it to be fairly dry. To where it's almost sticky. This paint is Prussian Blue PB27 from the My Lang Pretty Excellent palette. Once you have so much paint on your brush and your brush is fairly dry that it's sticky, then you can use it to put it on the paper. So this is going to be the darkest value. This is the darkest value that your watercolor is going to have, and it's going to scrape across the paper because it's so dry. And this is what Joseph Spukvich in his book Mastering Atmosphere and Mood in Watercolor was teaching when he taught of watercolor pigment and consistency. He called it the tea to butter method. But we're going to start off with the butter. So this one would be considered butter. Now we're going to add a little bit more water to our brush. And now you see it's not as sticky, but it's still pretty dark. See how it just flows? This one we would consider heavy cream. Add a little bit more water. Make it a little bit lighter. You see it's lighter than the last one. This one we would call milk. And a little bit more water. We're getting lighter and lighter. This would be considered coffee consistency. And then the last consistency would be called tea. So like tea is very translucent. You can see a lot of the light paper coming through. So that is the practice you want to do, and you can continue doing that. You can make lines and make it a little bit darker. Practice making the different consistencies with the lines. That's a little bit wet. Try to add some more paint to it. You want it to be as thick as possible so it's scraping across the paper. And you can do this over and over again. Just go from dark to light, and then light to dark, and then dark to light. And that is how you start to get to know the paint and how the pigments work with the water and the brush. And if you have too much paint on your brush, you can always just dab it on your paper towel. And it'll take some of that paint off, some of the water off, so that you can make the consistency you want. And that is how I'm able to control, to a point, because watercolor tends to have a mind of its own sometimes, but I'm able to control when I'm making dark lines or when I'm making a light wash. All right, if you have an idea of how this works, let's move on to making our first masterpiece. All right, so for this next part, I want to use a bigger brush because it'll make it easier to do the washes across the paper. So I'm using a number 10 Princeton Neptune round, but you can use any brand of brush. It doesn't matter what brand you're using. Just if you can get a bigger brush. If not, you can use the number 6 brush. It's just going to take you a lot more brush strokes to achieve the same effect. This offers a much cleaner look. So we're gonna wet our brush. We're gonna get some of the pigment. I'm gonna make sure it's nice and wet, and we're gonna go for that tea look. So we're gonna start with tea, and we're gonna start at the top of the page. We are going to make a beautiful mountainscape. And just start off by making a wash, just kind of making a rolling hill in the distance, and then just bring it down so it has that beautiful look, like it's far away. For this practice, blue is perfect because in North Carolina we have the Blue Ridge Mountains, and they just look like this beautiful rolling landscape and the way the mist hits it. Sometimes it looks like it's blue and it's so beautiful. I'm gonna take a hair dryer now to speed up the drying process. Now once it's completely dry, you want it to be dry so that the next pigment that we put down doesn't start to travel into the faraway mountains. So now we will take a little bit more of the pigment, the blue. We're going to go for a slightly darker color, making it, instead of the tea, we're going for more of a coffee. You can actually go a little bit darker with that. There we go. So there's more of a coffee consistency there, and we're just going to drag the brush down. I love the Princeton brushes, especially the Princeton Neptune, because they actually do hold a lot of water. So I don't have to dip my brush as often. I actually like how that looks, so I'm going to leave it like that. Make it a little bit more rigid and smooth. There we go. I'll dry this. You can usually tell when it's dry because it won't have as much shine to it. Watercolor has a very shiny look. Now dip your brush into the paint. We're going to make it into our milk consistency, and if you remember, and if you look at a glass of milk, it's translucent if you put a light up to it, but you cannot see through it. You won't see images, or you won't see as much through it. So you want it to be much thicker, but you want it to move like milk too. Oh, it looks pretty milky. So now we'll just a little bit darker. All right. Just follow the line. If you are in America and live out west, you could choose a dark purple color to do this and make the Rocky Mountains. Bring this away from there. Or if you just like colors, you can use whatever color you want. You can make it a black and white scape. I tend not to use much black in my paintings. If I have something that's dark that I need it to look black, I will usually just mix my own colors so that it can be harmonious with the colorscape, the color palette I'm using. All right, we'll dry this one. All right, put my brush, and then I'm gonna get a lot more paint for this one. So now we're trying to go for that heavy cream. It's gonna be much darker. Not quite dry like the butter, but it's gonna be much darker. Okay. See that contrast there? It's so much bigger. Because we are closer in the picture, the mountains are getting closer to us, I'm going to try to ease up more of the paper for these last two layers. So you want to have that look like you want it to look like it's closer to you. Because it's closer, I want to have more texture to it too. The further away, the smoother things look. The closer, the darker, the more detail you can see. Like that, so it looks like it's going down into a little valley. Okay. There we go. That looks pretty good. All right, and now I will dry this part. For the very last part, I'm just going to be dipping my brush directly into the paint and going straight from the paint to the paper, because this is the butter. So we have tea, coffee, milk, heavy cream, and now butter, because see how it drags. And this is where it would be good if you have a big brush. This would be good if you have a big brush, because it will help you to cover more of the paper. That's more of a heavy cream. I get it. I added too much water. Just keep dipping my brush in the pigment. That's better. So see how thick it is. You want it to be thick, like you're scraping it across the page. Finding the right consistency can be hard sometimes because you might have too much water or not enough water to where you can't get enough paint on the paper. If it's too dry, you'll just have that and you'll see a bunch of white. So you have to work at it and make sure you have that good balance. It needs enough water to be able to spread, but thick enough that it's like spreading butter. You don't want to be like butter spread across too much toast. Could be the Misty Mountains. See how if you had one of the smaller brushes, you'd be doing a lot of this. And so you'd see a lot of line marks, especially when it came to this last section with the butter, because you want this darkness to stand out. You want it to be the darkest. You can differentiate between that and the previous line. Like I said, I like it to have a little bit of texture in the front since it's closer. Might mimic trees. Just doesn't have to be anything. Right. Now dry that. There you go. Simple painting of a mountainscape using different levels of paint, getting darker as you're coming closer. From tea to coffee, milk, cream, and then butter. I love when I use a thicker consistency of paint, how you can see different textures and the wet on dry method makes it easier to do that. Now I'll show you how to remove your paper from your block. So if you look on the inside binding of your page, see that's already lifting up. You just take a knife or something that can go around and peel it around. Obviously you do that once it's dry, and there you go. Got your simple mountainscape, and you can practice this as much as you want. The myling, when it's very dark, it gets shiny. That's not wet, that's just shiny because of the fillers in the pigments. I hope you enjoyed learning how to paint a mountainscape. I hope this was easy to understand with one color pigment, using more water to get lighter colors and less water to get darker colors with your paint. And keep practicing. You can make this over and over again and just get the feel for the paint. Thank you for painting with me. I hope this tutorial helped you, and let's continue to grow hope, one brushstroke at a time.